On February 17, 2022, Brittany Griner arrived at an airport near Moscow, Russia. She was a star player on the Phoenix Mercury, a WNBA basketball team, and for the last 7 off-seasons also played on a Russian team. But as she approached security, agents stopped her. In her bags, they found cannabis oil. Then agents arrested her, and a court sentenced her to 9 years in prison for drug possession. But Russia didn't really imprison Griner because she broke the law. It imprisoned her because 7,000 miles away, a notorious Russian arms dealer sat in a U.S. prison. And Vladimir Putin wanted to make a trade. Over the last decade, the number of Americans detained abroad has skyrocketed, and many were detained by Russia. They are journalists, dissidents, and normal travelers. But to Putin, they're pawns. Pawns he can seize, trade, and use to extort the U.S. And so far, it's working.
This is a problem that's here to stay because it's a tactic that works.
So how'd we end up in a new era of hostage-taking? Why is Putin, in particular, kidnapping so many Americans? And how far is the U.S. willing to go to free them? For decades, the U.S. followed a simple rule in hostage situations. It's called no concessions. The rule was established in 1973 when the Palestinian terrorist group Black September kidnapped 2 U.S. diplomats and demanded that the U.S. free several hundred prisoners. President Richard Nixon felt that giving in would incentivize other terrorist groups to kidnap Americans, so he refused. Black September executed the Americans, but no concessions remained official U.S. policy, for the most part.
So the U.S. tried to uphold this policy, but in reality, we did sometimes make concessions.
Wall Street Journal reporters Drew Hinshaw and Joe Parkinson have been investigating hostage diplomacy for years, and they detail it all in a new book, Swap, A Secret History of the New Cold War.
And it depended on who was president, the way the president looked at this problem, and sometimes who the kidnapper was.
If the hostage was an American spy, the U.S. would tray a spy for him. Like in 1962, when the U.S. sent captured Soviet spy Rudolf Abel across this German bridge at the same time the Soviets sent across Gary Powers, a CIA pilot. The U.S. also sometimes made concessions if the kidnapper was a foreign government. Jimmy Carter lifted some sanctions on Iran to free hostages, and Ronald Reagan traded a Soviet spy for a detained American journalist. Because both of these governments were autocratic, they had an advantage over the U.S.
If you arrest an American citizen, there's public pressure on the White House to free that person at whatever price.
But because autocracies don't face public pressure, they can wait until the U.S. caves. Despite these exceptions, the U.S. mostly stuck to no concessions until the mid-2010s, when the terrorist group ISIS kidnapped several Americans. Barack Obama refused to negotiate, but after ISIS executed several of them, their families started speaking out.
Really hope that in some way, Jim's death pushes us to take another look at our policy to terrorist and hostage negotiations and rethink that.
Obama named a special envoy to meet with hostages' families. Then he announced a subtle change.
The United States government will not make concessions, such as paying ransom, to terrorist groups holding American hostages. At the same time, our policy does not prevent communication with hostage takers by our government, the families of hostages, or third parties who help.
Basically, Obama softened the rule to make deal-making less of an exception and more of a policy. He went on to make deals to free hostages held by Cuba, Iran, and the Taliban. Donald Trump did too. These negotiations often involved the hostages' families.
Families start feeding the special envoy ideas for how we could bring these Americans who are trapped overseas home, and those ideas filter all the way up to the White House, and concessions start happening.
To many, this was the U.S. finally doing the right thing. But at the same time, it was incentivizing more hostage-taking. The Foley Foundation reports that American detentions abroad began rising around 2011, driven not by terrorists, but mostly by foreign governments. Leading the way was Putin's Russia. In 2018, he had police detain an American tourist. Paul Whelan was in Russia for a wedding when Russian agents arrested and accused him of spying. Then a court sentenced him to 16 years in prison for espionage. There was barely any evidence, But for Putin, it was worth any potential blowback.
Russia already knows it's in a position where it's hardly being covered positively after the illegal invasion of Ukraine. And so it's just looking for what levers it can pull, for what capital it can extract.
But Putin wouldn't offer to trade Whelan for money or sanctions relief. He wanted his spies back. Now, even though following the news is my job, I'm finding it harder than ever to keep up. You can scroll every headline and every update, but still not really understand what's going on. Sift is built to make that easier. Sift combines everything into one clean global newsfeed, combining major and local news sources from around the world and translating key highlights into many languages, so you'll never miss a story because of a language barrier. And the best part is, Sift is completely free. Using Sift is super easy, and it's become a top-ranked app, even #1, in major countries such as France, Portugal, Spain, and Brazil. All you do is you type in the exact topic you care about. I want to follow the Trump administration's intervention in Venezuela and my favorite sports team, the Washington Capitals. But you can follow anything you're curious about, from major news events to surprising scientific discoveries. Sift scans trusted news sources from around the world and delivers clear, real-time summaries and updates. It's like having an assistant that keeps up with the news for you and delivers the highlights in seconds. And if you're on the go and you prefer audio, Sift provides updates in podcast format too. Once you follow a topic, Sift keeps it in your feed with daily digests, quick summaries, and links if you want to explore more. Sift and Search Party share the same mission. That's to make the news more accessible and understandable. So search and download Sift, the AI news agent now. It's free. You can find it in the App Store or on Google Play. Thanks again to Sift for their support, and I'll take you back to the story. Putin got his start as a Russian spy. And as president, he feels it's his duty to free Russian spies captured abroad.
I was actually surprised the degree to which Vladimir Putin could even be seen as somewhat sentimental. But for him, there's something deep inside, a loyalty, a sense of allegiance to what he sees as a kind of Praetorian Guard.
Officially, Victor Bout was an arms dealer, but it's been suspected he worked closely with Russian intelligence. Through the 1990s, he sold weapons to governments and rebels from Africa to Asia. He earned a fortune and a nickname.
Russian arms dealer Victor Bout, also known as the Merchant of Death.
The Merchant of Death.
The famed Merchant of Death.
The U.S. hunted Bout for years until catching him in a sting operation in Thailand in 2008. Bout was a few years into a 25-year sentence when Putin detained Paul Whelan and proposed a trade for him. But Trump said no. Then Putin detained another American and offered him too, but Trump again said no. Putin's mistake was that he wanted a convicted arms dealer for two normal guys. Whelan and Reed's families held protests and went on the news.
I have found it necessary to sort of run around D.C., visiting all of these people and trying to keep the pressure on.
But they couldn't attract enough attention to force Trump to make a deal to free them. So Putin waited until Joe Biden took office to kidnap someone who would get that kind of attention. Images of Griner stuck in a Russian prison immediately went viral, and her relatives and celebrities pushed Biden to make a deal to free her.
There should be no swapping deal that does not include Brittany Griner.
We're never going to shut up about this until she's back. We're never going to allow them to take their precious time.
The more public attention there was on Griner's case, the more that tied the government's hands, because they had to respond to that pressure.
Joe Biden called in his national security team and he said, "We're going to have to cave sooner or later. Might as well cave now."
Just 10 months after her arrest, the U.S. swapped Bout for Griner. Both sides got what they wanted, but Putin got something more, a playbook. By kidnapping a notable American, Putin proved he could free any Russian spy he wanted. The next on his list was an assassin convicted of murder in Germany. And so in early 2023, Putin detained another American, this time a journalist, at a major paper, the Wall Street Journal.
Evan Gershkovich, arrested in Russia, officially designated as wrongfully detained.
The Journal's entire newsroom rallying behind him today.
Evan Gershkovich was in Russia reporting when agents arrested and charged him with espionage. Almost immediately, news of his arrest went viral. His relatives, along with the Journal, pushed for his release, and his colleagues, Joe and Drew, started investigating what was going on.
We knew that there was a chance Brittany Griner's arrest would incentivize more hostage takings, and what we soon learned was a game of prisoner trading that has been going on between the US and Russia.
But in this game, Putin held all the cards. Biden only had a couple Russian hackers in custody, not enough to free Evan. And he couldn't force Germany to trade the assassin either. Biden needed more cards to play. So he asked his allies to round up all the Russian spies they could.
It's 2022, 2023. the US is shouldering the burden in Ukraine. Europe hasn't quite gotten its act together in terms of equipping and funding the Ukrainian defense. And all these countries feel a little bit obligated to help America. We're helping you with your crisis in Ukraine. Help us with our crisis in Russia.
First, Norway arrested a researcher. Then Slovenia arrested a married couple. Then Poland arrested a journalist. On the surface, they were normal people, but in reality, they were all Russian spies. Journalist Pablo Gonzalez was caught passing information on the Russian opposition and Ukrainian military to Russian intelligence. Researcher Jose Giamaria was himself an intelligence officer embedded in Norway's Arctic region. And Anna and Artem Doltsev worked for decades as elite deep cover agents in Argentina and Slovenia. Joe and Drew write that Slovenian agents found Anna spying on an EU energy agency and hiding handwritten messages for her handlers. They were exactly the kind of people Putin valued most, and thanks to the US's allies, they were enough to get Putin to agree to a trade. At first, it was these Russians for these Americans, plus several others detained in Russia. Crucially, Germany agreed to trade the Russian assassin for Putin's arch-rival. Alexei Navalny spent years building a movement against Putin. He survived 2 assassination attempts before he was arrested and sent to a brutal prison camp. In fact, Joe and Drew report that the idea to include Navalny actually came from a network of his family members and friends quietly pressuring the government. Navalny was the key to the most elaborate prisoner swap since the Cold War, when suddenly, in February 2024,
Alexei Navalny has died suddenly in prison.
Vladimir Putin's most energetic critic
felt unwell after a walk on Friday and lost consciousness.
It was devastating for the Navalny people. His widow, Yulia, gave this impassioned speech with tears running down her cheeks.
Этот режим и Владимир Путин должны понести персональную ответственность за все те ужасные вещи, которые они делают.
We thought, that's it. There's no hope for even a simple trade.
But over the next few months, the US, its allies, and Russia kept negotiating. And on the night of August 1st, 6 planes took off from 6 countries. On the first 5 were the Russian spies, and on the 6th were 16 people held by Russia. One by one, they arrived at an airport in Turkey and swapped sides. Putin welcomed his spies and assassins, while Biden and European leaders welcomed citizens, journalists, and dissidents. It marked the start of a new era where governments trading people is the norm. A few months later, Trump traded a Russian cybercriminal for an American, Mark Fogel. Now there are fewer American hostages in Russia, but Putin's incentive to take more is stronger than ever, because he's seen that it works, and he's not alone.
While Putin may be the world's kidnapper-in-chief because he's so forensic and so calculating with his targets, the example that he set worldwide has been followed by many others.
According to the Foley Foundation, there are at least 39 Americans wrongfully detained today. They're mostly normal people, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Some are in Russia, but dozens are being held in Cuba, Iran, China, and other countries. And these are just the American hostages. States are leveraging people for sanctions relief, diplomatic deals, and other prisoners. Hostage-taking is one of the clearest signs that our world is becoming more competitive and transactional.
We came into this story trying to cover what happened to our colleague and our friend, and what we actually ended up understanding was a whole way of decoding geopolitics and how it now works in this more transactional environment.
And this more transactional environment is a more dangerous one for all of us.
When we travel abroad, we risk becoming the human currency for a very piratical new world order in which trading in people is just what governments do.
All right, thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet to Search Party, please do. I also want to invite you to join newpress.com. It's a new community-driven journalist project started by Johnny Harris and I and Christoph, and we're really excited to launch very soon. It's basically a place where I can ask you guys questions about your cities or your countries or your sports, and you can talk to me about what stories you want to see covered and how we should cover them. We're really excited to launch super soon, so if you want to be one of the first people in, please sign up now at newpress.com. You'll hear from Johnny first, who will give you a little bit more detail about what this is. Excited to see what you and I can come up with. We're back next month with a video about the Winter Olympics, so excited for that one. I'll see you then.